بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في القرآن المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قد أفلح من زكاها صدق الله العظيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through his grace has enabled us to gather to listen to his precious words, and this action of listening to his words or expressing his words, this only comes through his tawfiq and through his grace. Upon every action that a believer does, one very important point that a believer has to keep in mind, and that is that whatever action he does, whatever worship he does, it must be solely for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala, who has written the famous compilation Sahih Bukhari, the first hadith which is recorded in his book is the hadith on rectifying one's intentions. Innamal a'malu bin niyat, that all actions are dependent upon intentions. So the ulama ikram have mentioned that before someone even goes further into reading the book, let him stop and pause and just contemplate over why he is reading this great work of Imam Bukhari and what is his intention. This is the whole purpose of, or one of the greatest purposes of reading Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's ahadith, studying his ahadith. What is the intention and what is the purpose? We are reminded over and over again to focus on our intentions and to rectify our intentions. The nafs, by default, is like a child. A child who grows up in an environment where there's absolutely no discipline, no training. That child will do what he wants, how he wants, say what he wants, do as he pleases. The child understands that I have not been disciplined, so I can do whatever I want, and no one is there to stop me. It is for this reason that parents, they counsel the children, they discipline the children, they nurture the children, and they try to explain to the children that this is right and this is wrong. In the same manner, by default, the nafs, it is nafsul ammara. Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam mentions in the glorious Quran, وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ, that I do not absolve myself from my nafs, and indeed the nafs, by default, it commands a person to do wrong. What is the nafs? The nafs is an internal power which takes a person towards either right or wrong. If that nafs hasn't been trained, if that nafs hasn't been disciplined, then automatically that nafs will take a person towards those things which he is habituated in doing. Now let us understand a very important point here, and that is, shaitan is a person's open and internal enemy. However, the nafs is not a person's eternal enemy. Rather, the nafs, if a person was to train it, the nafs can become a person's companion, and it can help a person. And if that nafs is left untrained, then that same nafs will accompany shaitan. Now there will be two forces working against an individual. Many of our young generation who are 14, 15, 16, they have these two forces working against them at full power. Shaitan is definitely each and every person's open enemy. Apart from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in respect to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, once he was asked by the companions radiyallahu anhum, that do you also have a shaitan? So he said, Naam wa aslama. Yes, I also have a shaitan. However, he aslama, he accepted Islam. That means the harm which shaitan does to a normal believer, shaitan cannot do that to me because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is Allah's special and chosen servant. But for the general masses, shaitan tries to mislead every single person, and he makes them believe that whatever they are doing is correct, and he tries to deprive them from the most virtuous and the most meritorious acts. So nafs wants pleasures. Nafs wants enjoyments. Now, some people, they find pleasures and enjoyments in food. So by default, their nafs is inclined towards food all the time. And for some people, they will say that food is life. Food is life and life is food. And this is a stage which a person goes through. Those people who have gone through this stage and have passed through this stage and have come out the other end, when they look back, what was I doing? And what is my friend doing? And what are my companions doing? They are completely engrossed in food. And they are oblivious of the other good blessings, the other good favors that we should be giving attention to. So some people are inclined towards good food. Some people, when we say good food, we mean excessive good food. By way that this becomes objective and all the other main things are left untouched. There's no punctuality in congregation in the masajid. There's no attendance in the talks. All of these things are secondary. All these things are on the, or number 3, number 4, number 5. Priority is given to food. For some, priority is given to women. That's why it's among the etiquettes and it's among the advices that are given by the ulama ikram to the newlyweds, especially the boy, that if he gives into his emotions, then his wife will read right through him. So if a person gets married and he forsakes his Fajr Salah on the night of marriage, that gives a clear signal to the wife that my new husband is ready to give my emotions preference over Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commands. So the ulama ikram have mentioned that whatever molding, whatever training, whatever discipline a person wants to do, he must do it in the beginning days. Otherwise, that training and that discipline, it cannot happen afterwards. Because now the wife is fully aware of her husband's habits, and it becomes virtually impossible for him to train her. One of our ulama ikram mashayikh, they have mentioned a joke, but this joke, it holds some reality. There was a very great sheikh, and usually great mashayikh, great ulama, people who are strangers to them, people who are foreign to them, people who don't interact with them often, they will consider this person or these people to be great, but the people within the household, they have absolutely no value for these individuals. There's a very famous saying in the Urdu language, Gar ki murgi dal barabar. Gar ki murgi dal barabar. This means that the chicken, the delicious food which the wife prepares at home, the husband, because he's used to the wife's taste, so he will give absolutely no value to his wife's food. Whereas a guest who comes into the home, he will value every single morsel of that food. So in the same manner, the wives, they don't give absolutely any significance or any importance to their husbands whatsoever. This applies to everyone, even the mashayikh and even the ulama ikram also face this issue. Nonetheless, the sheikh wanted to impress his wife. So the sheikh said, I will perform a karamat. Karamat means a miracle. Now, keep in mind, miracles are such things which a person cannot perform out of his own accord. Only if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives permission, then a person can perform miracles. Even though Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was unable to perform miracles without the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is for this reason that in some battles, many companions were martyred. So if Rasulullah was granted knowledge of the unseen without any restrictions, then would he allow his companions to be martyred? Would he allow himself to be injured in the Battle of Uhud? Would he allow his teeth to be injured? Would he allow his uncle Hamza radiallahu ta'ala to be martyred? No, he wouldn't. So only when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants permission, only then can a person manifest miracles. So the Prophet's miracles are known as mu'jizat. Mu'jizat. And they are recorded in the Quran, they are recorded in the Hadith. And let's say if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes for one of his pious servants to perform a miracle, then this shouldn't be far-fetched. This is also possible, but this is only to the will and permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So nonetheless, the Shaykh was very close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he said to his wife that, just give me a few minutes. I will return after a few minutes, and then we will converse. So the Shaykh, he went outside. He must have prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, I'm trying to discipline my wife. Oh Allah, I'm trying to train my wife. So allow me to do something which is extraordinary. So after a few moments, he came back to the house, and he said to his wife that, did you see a man a few moments ago? He was flying in the air. And she said, yes. So the Shaykh was happy that this is my opportunity to shine. This is my opportunity to make my presence felt in her heart and to gain a very special position. So the Shaykh said that that was me. The wife replied by saying, oh, that's why you were flying crooked. So there's absolutely no point in trying to impress anyone after the beginning stages. It's the beginning stages which count. So if the husband who is newlywed, if he has importance for deen, if he has importance for Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then he must show that to his wife in the beginning stages of his life. Only then will his wife value this quality of his. If he tries to impress him afterwards, her afterwards, it will be a complete failure. I'll mention another story, which is also a joke, but again, this story, it has some truth to it. There was another man who, again, wanted to impress his wife and wanted to show his wife that I am very courageous. So a cat was passing by. This individual, he took a stick and he threw the stick onto the ground, or hit the stick onto the ground very harshly to prove to his wife that I am very courageous and I can do those things which other men cannot do. So after a few moments, the husband asked his wife, did you see me in action? And she was not impressed by him at all. She said, yes. Said, I saw you, but you're striking the ground. It absolutely means nothing to me because I know who you are. I know what kind of a person you are. You're a very soft person. So even if you were to strike a cat, an animal, it will have absolutely no difference or any impact on me whatsoever. So we must keep one very important point in mind, and that is the husband should only try to impress Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the wife should also impress Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by doing so, they should fulfill each other's right. It shouldn't be that the wife is concerned to make her husband her slave or vice versa. Each and every single person should become the slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the goal of life. To become the slave of Allah. If someone becomes the slave of Allah, Allah will give that person freedom. And if a person tries to make others his slave, neither will he become the slave of Allah and nor will others become his slave. Because now he's following his nafs. So just as I was mentioning, the first type of nafs is nafsul amara, which means if a person does not work on himself, by default, whatever a person's nafs finds pleasurable, he will be inclined towards that action. And our young generation who are 15, 16, 17, many of these boys and girls, they are inclined towards their phones, they are inclined towards messaging, they are inclined towards boyfriends and girlfriends. Just want to mention another story which I witnessed a few days ago at a school. These boys and girls were probably 12 at the most, a 12-year-old. And unfortunately, sometimes we have to see things which we are not pleased with. So Two 12-year-olds, na'udhu billah, are having a wrong and a haram and an illicit relationship in front of all the parents who are standing in line trying to collect their kids. And after a few days, I was observing the body language of the boy and trying to protect my gaze from the girl. On the apparent, it seemed that now this boy and girl are separated because every day they have a set routine. They would do this, meet up at a certain point. When I was observing this boy and I was thinking to myself, at this age, the age of 12, 13, one will only be inclined towards those things which his nafs is attracted towards. So if a person doesn't use his intellect and he gives into his emotions, he gives into whatever his nafs says, then his education, his school, everything that he values will just be tarnished and go to waste. It'll have no value whatsoever. So many a times, as Muslims, we don't understand, and we think to ourselves that I have been performing my 5 times salawat for the past 20 years, 25 years. So the talk that the Shaykh is giving in respect to the nafs, it doesn't apply to me because my nafs is in check. My nafs is 100% how it should be because I am performing my salawat for the past 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam once came to Rasulullah alayhi wasallam and he asked him several questions. So from these several questions, there were 3 main questions. Number 1, what is Iman? Number 2, what is Islam? And number 2, what is Ihsan? So Rasulullah alayhi wasallam, he defined Iman, he defined Islam, and he defined Ihsan. The muhaddithin have mentioned that in order for a person to protect his Iman, to protect his good actions, to protect his salawat, to protect his attendance in the masajid, to protect any of his good deeds from impurities, not only is Iman necessary, not only are good actions necessary, but ihsan, tazkiyah, and controlling the nafs is very important and necessary. And one quality which a person needs to have in his life, this quality is known as ikhlas. Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, he's narrated a hadith wherein he mentioned that Rasulullah alayhi wasallam, he said that in the hereafter, on the day of Qiyamah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he calls everyone for reckoning, so the first person that will be called, or the first 3 people that will be called, number 1 is a qadi. A qadi is that individual who not only has memorized the Quran, but he's also learned the meanings of the Quran. So a qadi, an alim, a sheikh, an imam. This is the first person. A second person, a shaheed, one who was martyred in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And number 3, a sakhi, one who is extremely generous. So these 3 people will be the first 3 people that will be called before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for accountability and for reckoning in the hereafter. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask the alim, the sheikh, the qadi, that ماذا عملت فيما علمت? Whatever you learned, whatever you studied, this was a great blessing. Now, how much of that did you practice upon? You were teaching others. You were the imam of the Jami Masjid. You were the sheikh of the entire city, the entire region. You did this, you did this, you did this. You wrote so and so many books. You did so and so many lectures. You used to travel from point A to point B. Your videos used to circulate online. This person will say that, oh Allah, I did this solely for your pleasure. Allah will say, kadabta, you are lying. And then the angels will also say, kadabta, that you are lying. Thereafter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say that you acquired knowledge not to please me, you acquired knowledge to please the masses, to please the people. And you acquired knowledge to be referred to as the greatest sheikh, the greatest mufti, the greatest alim, the greatest imam of your locality and of your time. You acquired all those labels, so go to those people who you studied knowledge for, and you go to them for compensation and reward. Then the angels will take this person and throw this person into Jahannam. Who? That individual who spent his entire life serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's deen. Thereafter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will call those who were martyred in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, the same question will be presented to them. That Allah granted you a lot of courage, a lot of boldness, and you served Islam, you fought in this battle, you fought in that battle, you took down this enemy, and eventually you were martyred. So why did you do all this? This individual will say, "Oh Allah, I did this solely to please you." Allah again will say, "Kadabta," that you are lying. And the angels will also confirm by saying, "Kadabta." Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say that you did all this solely to be called a very courageous person. So again, the reason why you did this was to please the people. So go to them today and go get your reward from these individuals. Again, this person will be thrown in to Jahannam. And the third person, he will have spent a lot of his wealth in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in constructing masajid, in constructing madaris, in constructing good, noble work. And the same question will be presented to him. And again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say to him, after he replies, that kadabta, you have lied. That you have done all this to be called a very generous person. The son of Hatim Tai. Hatim Tai was a very generous person. So you wanted to be attributed towards Hatim Tai. You wanted to be called a very generous person. And in this world that you lived in, you acquired that status. So why are you coming to me? Go to these individuals. So in this hadith, it is clearly understood that whatever action is done for anyone but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that action has no value. That's why in this hadith of Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam, first comes Iman, then comes Islam, and then comes Ihsan. So tazkiyah protects a person's actions from polluting. Tazkiyah protects a person's good actions from becoming rotten. And among these good actions, one action is that a person, he must develop ikhlas, he must develop sincerity, and this sincerity is something which cannot be seen. This is between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, the science of tazkiyah, the science of tasawwuf, the science of ihsan, if a person has understanding of this science, only then will you have concern of wanting to develop ikhlas and sincerity. I'll just mention a few more points and then I'll conclude. In today's day and age, many people have this desire that they manifest their Hajj before leaving for Hajj, whilst performing Hajj, and after returning for Hajj. I have personally seen people who are posing in front of the Kaaba, who are making selfies of themselves, and then that picture is posted in the Muslim community's newspaper. And the objective is to show people that we here are worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I have seen this in janazas. Even in janazas, after the burial, there was a family who made a semicircle around the grave, and they had their hands and they had their arms over the shoulders of their relatives, and they were posing, and they were even smiling right after the burial for a picture. So a person, if ihsan, tazkiyah, tasawwuf, this realization that my Allah is watching me, if this concept is not there, then there's absolutely no extent and no limits that a person can go to. So nonetheless, before a person even goes for Hajj, he needs to examine his intention, and likewise whilst he's performing Hajj and when he returns. The Shaykh was asked, the Shaykh, how many Hajj have you performed? So he must have performed 20, 30, 40 Hajj. The Shaykh, very quietly, he looked up and he said, he looked down. He looked down out of shame, out of humility, and he said, only he knows how much Hajj I have performed. This means the Shaykh knew the exact number of Hajj that he performed. But number one, there was absolutely no reason for him to manifest his actions. And number two, this means that only he knows how much or how many hajj were performed, this actually means that although I performed 40 hajj, 50 hajj, but only Allah knows how many of these 50 or 40 hajj are accepted. So this is a very common misunderstanding, and that is we look at the outer actions and we become pleased, we become satisfied, and we become content that I am doing a lot. But as long as those actions, if they are done with ikhlas, then Allah will accept these actions. And if these actions are not done with ikhlas, then these actions have no acceptance in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whatsoever. So again, this realization that Allah is watching me, this realization that I need to do everything solely to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this concern, it only comes and it's only developed once a person has concern for tazkiyah, ihsan, and tasawwuf. It doesn't come simply by listening to or by speaking on the subject of ikhlas. So right now, I'm speaking on the subject of ikhlas, sincerity, and everyone is listening to ikhlas. So just by listening to topics about constructing homes and giving lectures on constructing homes, this does not mean that homes will be automatically constructed. So in the same manner, giving lectures on the subject of ikhlas and giving lectures or listening to lectures, this doesn't mean that automatically ikhlas is developed. This gives us a boost. This gives us some kind of guidance that we need to work towards developing this quality and work towards developing our heart and constructing our heart in accordance to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to see this heart. And some things which will aid a person and help a person is, number one, sitting in the company of those people who have ikhlas. Sitting in the company of the pious people, number one. Number two, engaging in regular dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So every day, daily, a person should remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's very easy. A person should have a set target. It shouldn't be, I will do how much I want, when I want. If I do it, if I complete it, fine and well. And if it's not complete, it's okay. At least I'm doing other things. No, it should be done with punctuality. And the general guidelines are, number one, 100 times istighfar, 100 times salat and salam, and 100 times the first part of the first kalima, la ilaha illallah, or the first part of the third kalima, subhanallahi walhamdulillahi wa la ilaha illallah wallahu akbar. This is the general dhikr. There's many adhkar, there's many tasbihat, there's many du'as which a person can recite, but this is the general dhikr. So these two things will help a person and aid a person in his ultimate objective, and that is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in carrying out all the do's and abstaining from all the don'ts. So after the talk, usually we have a 10 to 12 minute session of dhikr, wherein again we are reminded to solely focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and just think to yourself that I am a very busy person, I'm usually engaged in other work. Try to connect with Allah directly. Remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's favors upon you. Remember Allah's love. This should be the thought process, that Allah is looking at me with love. Despite my disobedience, despite my shortcomings, Allah is looking at me with love. So this dhikr should be done silently. Astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah. And if a person loses his concentration, again, he should again try to refocus, and inshallah he will see the blessings and benefits of this if it's done long term. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to understand and practice. Once a spiritual student, he asked his sheikh, what if a person falls asleep whilst doing dhikr? So the sheikh said, if a person falls asleep, then he should go to sleep. Now, if a person is falling asleep every single day, every single time, then there's something to worry about. But generally speaking, when a person engages in dhikr, shaitan, he should be running away from that person. But shaitan puts that person to sleep. Or the rahmah and mercy of performing that dhikr overpowers and overcomes that person, and that person is now in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let us try to at least be alert to the best of our ability. And if Allah wants you to sleep, then that's what Allah has decreed for you. But nonetheless, let us try to